Anyway, welcome everybody. Welcome everybody here on Zoom to our third talk in this series. And I just wanted to start to say, just to contextualize these talks, because they are a series. Each topic is self-contained, but they are a series, and they're building up a bigger question of why dance and why are we engaging in this thing called dance. So it is embedded in a dance paradigm here. So I'm really focusing on that aspect of it. So I don't always have to go like, and dance does this, and dance does that. It's like implied that what I'm talking about is, or what we're doing, comes also from the dance. The other thing is that the research that I've been doing is wider than biodanza. So most of us do biodanza, but a lot of this is applicable to a wider dance. And, you know, a lot of biodanza people like to think that, you know, it's the be all and end all, you know, and it's the answer to everything in dance. But I would remind them that actually biodanza is a subset of dance, not dance a subset of biodanza. So there are things that are wider and apply maybe in other paradigms. And especially today and last week when we spoke about the shaman's body and how it works, and shifting consciousness and how it works, and shifting and going into altered states of consciousness, etc. It's about these things take place in other paradigms. Now, at the same time, not all dance is equal. The two aspects of dance that are important in the work that we do is the one that it has an element of creativity. In other words, it engages a creative process. So sure, you can go and do dance and it has steps and you can come out of there with all the endorphins flowing and feeling good, but actually very often those kinds of dances will be just reinforcing existing patterns, you know? When you go off to do your dance in the disco, you know the uncles that sort of dance like this, and the next wedding they dance like this, and the next wedding they dance like this. So you just reinforce the pattern. So you want to find something that pushes the parameters, moving the other thumb forward, so to speak. And the other one is an intentionality. It's what sits behind the actual dance, and the mechanisms that sit behind this dance, which we're going to discuss a little bit today in terms of the altered states of consciousness. So the first talk we had was embodiment, and really it was just in one sentence that we experience life through our bodies. We learn about life through our bodies, and we are in constant interacting with life through our bodies. It's not a mental activity. It's really an embodied experience that we have. So we sit the dance, and we sit the learning, and we sit everything in the body. And the body is an integrated body. It's the mind, the heart, the muscles, everything. It's not, when we say body, it doesn't mean we cut off from the neck down. It means we integrate everything into one aspect. The second talk we had was called the Shaman's Body. And there we spoke a lot about how we have the ordinary state of being, ordinary state of consciousness, or primary consciousness. It's how we operate in the world, and how that is based a lot on the patterns and the habits that we accumulate. And this is not to say this is negative. This is a survival mechanism. Every time you go to hunt a lion, you don't want to go through the whole learning. You want to be there. You want to narrow down your perception, you want to narrow down your focus, you want to narrow down, draw on your knowledge, knowing how to do this, and you do it. And so it's part of life that we narrow things, that we focus, that we constrict our awareness and attention to what we're doing, rather than to everything else. Aldous Huxley wrote a book called The Doors of Perception, and he talks about how the mind or the brain is a gateway for consciousness, and how the brain closes the gap, so we only see a little bit. And when you go and take psychedelic drugs, which are under the chairs if you want one, you can all go home with a psychedelic drug. He's talking in terms of psychedelics, but when you take psychedelic, it opens up that doorway so that the perception opens up. But we do it without drugs. We do it with dance. And maybe it's not as like kaboom in your face and right away as taking something, but nevertheless, it's as effective in what we do. So in that talk last month, we had the ordinary state of being and how dance takes us into a non-ordinary state of being, an altered consciousness. And today, I just want to look at that a little bit more. So just to open up that conversation more. Can you see it? Okay, this was the talk. This is where we ended last talk. This was the last slide from the last talk. So back to that, where we talk about shifting the assemblage point, which is a phrase that Carlos Castaneda uses. He talks about the whole of the universe and all the threads of awareness and perception coming to a point, and that the shamans have the techniques to shift that point. So shifting the assemblage point shifts from a state of ordinary consciousness to non-ordinary consciousness. But was probably a little bit more than that. So this handsome person is me. And I thought it's just would be useful in a way to just to talk about a little bit, just quickly, of my own experience in this, because I have experienced this in so many different ways. And the very first time that I experienced a shift in consciousness was on a workshop, which was called Transformation, and it was in London, and it was by somebody from the Lindsay King Theatre there. And I can't remember the details of what we did on that workshop, because it was like maybe the first alternative dance workshop I've done in my life. But I do remember having this experience, which people have when they have near-death experiences. So I had this experience of going down a tunnel, the white, meeting somebody, having the overwhelming emotion of love and not wanting to come back. Those are very characteristic of near-death experiences. And that was through a dance workshop. So my very first powerful experience was through that. And I thought, at the time, I didn't think I didn't think this is what I want to do. But subsequently, I did dabble, as some of you know, with the psychedelics, primarily with Ayahuasca and San Pedro, and here every month with cacao. These are now sort of coming down in intensity of experience. But especially the Ayahuasca was very often, I've done it like about 40 times, so it's like really just picking out moments on this journey, but moments of sheer ecstasy in the dance. When I've taken these psychedelics, half the time I'm dancing as well, and really going into a really ecstatic state, and feeling the that energy that I'll speak about later on, and euphoria. I've had the experience also through movement on ayahuasca of shapeshifting, of becoming an animal, not portraying, but actually becoming the animal and going into those movements. So somewhere we carry that memory of our whole evolutionary bloodline, so to speak, in our body. So it's not just here and now. And then it was also very interesting, on a personal note, that one of the visions that I remember very, very clearly was of my body realigning itself cell by cell by cell. So it was almost like everything in one of these experiences was realigning, but physically. And more often than not, my journey with the ayahuasca has been physical. It's been through breathing, movement, whatever. I'm very seldom been on those journeys that a lot of other people go where they meet like dwarfs and fairies and Christ and whatever, It's been a very visceral experience. And so, yeah. And then lastly, in terms of the movement, is when I went to a workshop in France many years ago and learned how to do the wording of the whirling dervishes. And what was interesting, one time my friend Debbie Baumeister, some of you might know her, and I trundled off to Rastus Valley on our own, hired out the big Lapa there for the weekend, and we decided we're going to whirl until we drop. We're going to really push this. And at the time, what happened is that the stages that I experienced through ayahuasca in my body, I experienced in the whirling. So and the whirling at times has also got me to that trance ecstatic state. So it's all interrelated, and for me, this is what I want to bring. This is what I want to bring into the work that I do. Those experiences, those memories are in my body, so I know where to go. And what's interesting also out of that is that there are these somatic markers, these moments of resistance that are similar. And so there's a similar pattern, whether you're doing the ayahuasca, San Pedro, Les Bois, cacao, a nice berry, whatever, or the dance. So what am I talking about? I'm really talking about the altered states of consciousness. But before I talk about altered states of consciousness, I just wanted to talk a little bit about this word consciousness. And so it's a topic that for many, many years has been almost like taboo in science, but has had a lot of interest, over the last few years. And there's a whole lot of theories, and nobody knows. Okay, there is no answer to the question, what is consciousness? When I am eating a chocolate cake and I'm experiencing that moment of delight, that's a conscious moment. Sure, you can explain the taste buds and the neurons and whatever, but you can't explain the experience. And the experience is the consciousness. So there's almost like two sides to the theories that are out there, or let's put it two extremes. The one's called very materialistic. It's like people who, most of them, avowed atheists and talk about this being a machine, and because the neurons fire in a particular way, in particular patterns, that creates consciousness, and that's what it is. It's the body and the brain creating consciousness. On the other side is the idea that that consciousness is out there. It's out there, and we are receptors. So the brain, the body, or whatever is like an antenna. It's actually plugging into consciousness. And of course, there's 100 theories in between, but those are like the two extremes. Tonight, I'm going to talk, and I'm going to talk as if I'm talking from a materialistic point of view, because a lot of maybe what I'm saying will sound very like, well, because this happens, that's why you go into trance. But I just wanted to make the point that I'm just doing that as a way of understanding what's going on, and it is valid, okay? But it's not that we're going to hold, when this talk finishes, for me, a materialistic point of view. Okay, because serotonin is released in your brain, that's now you're going to trance or whatever, you know? It's more than that. And there's this idea that consciousness is, it's almost like this pervasive, universal thing, whatever, there's a moment in which the sea of consciousness materializes into an individual consciousness. So there's a sea, and in a moment, it's the same consciousness that becomes me. It's the same, this is what I'm trying to show in the drawing. It's the same consciousness that becomes Adele. It's the same consciousness that becomes Chantal. But there's a philosopher, I think he's a philosopher, Tim Freak, who's written 101 books. And he talks about that moment when the consciousness becomes individual. It builds a forgetfulness around it, so that it thinks that it's the only thing and it's separate from everything else. But in reality, it's not. It's part of a sea of consciousness. By the way, this drawing is also based on an ayahuasca vision, where one night I asked the question, but I asked it from a different perspective. I asked it from, like, what is a baby experiencing, you know, when it's a baby? And this is the vision I had, that the baby it's experiencing everything in a flow of consciousness. There's no separation of the senses. There's no separation of itself. It's part of everything in the moment. And what I got really strongly in that vision was a sense of the connection between the individuals, which is Eros. Eros in Biodanza, now and again I'll tell you about Biodanza, is, and elsewhere really, is the force of attraction and aversion in the universe. Okay, so it's what keeps everything in balance, what attracts, what repulses. Those of you who were here on Wednesday did a dance around this. Do you remember? we danced it. We danced this Eros because we were preparing for the talk. I wanted you to feel it in your body that you were going to come here. So let's see what's next. Just as an aside, there's a guy called Rupert Sheldrake who talks about morphogenic fields. And what he talks about here is that different species or different groupings have their own almost fields of consciousness. And those allow that species to become a fish, or that species to become a person, or that species to become a tree. It's a morphogenic field. How does the tree know to look like a tree? How does a tree know how to be a tree? It comes out of the consciousness, but it comes out of this morphogenic field. So it's just to hold that moment and relate it to levels of consciousness. Because Tim Freak, as well, coming back to him, talks about evolution of consciousness. And what he's saying is that if you go back to the beginning, to the amoeba and to whatever, and the fish and the mammal and us, that not only are we, not only is there an evolution in terms of this body, but it also is reflected in consciousness. So the fish has consciousness, but it has a level of consciousness. So I put it down there, you know. The cat has a level of consciousness, but it's a bit high or a bit more, and the human a bit more. And what he's saying is that, and this is not a religion or a religious lesson, but what he's saying is we have this idea that there's a God and presses the button and everything starts on a journey. And what he's saying is, no, actually, there is nothing that starts it. It's evolving towards God or towards an end consciousness, which is this thing above here. And it's quite interesting to look at it that way, aside from religion, because it is about going from the individual to a more collective, or not even a collective, to an undifferentiated consciousness, which we do when we go into altered states in trance. We lose our separation and our barriers. So I thought I'd try and show this way. In a way, this is the dancer, and this is about moving into altered states and moving into the unconscious. And it also reflects a little bit psychology and the evolution of the theory along this. But we start off with a personal unconscious. Well, the diagram starts off with a personal unconscious, in which sits the biography of me. So the things that have happened to me personally that have not happened to Chantal go into my personal unconscious, and they sit there. The things that have happened to Chantal, or she's taken into her subconscious or unconscious, that God goes into her personal. And they're different. So our experiences are different because we have become we become differentiated. And that's a lot of, it's based on Freud, okay? Then along comes Jung, and he talks about the collective unconscious. He says, very well, there is you and me and everything, but beyond that, there's something more, there's us. And in that collective unconscious sits the archetypes that we spoke of last time as well. So I don't want to go back into that, but remember that they sit there. And the archetypes are universal patterns that are expressed individually. So the archetype of mother, or the archetype of dragon, or the archetype of whatever. There's a zillion. If you read the literature, it just goes on and on and on. Is expressed, and we take on as we learn, and we saw this last time, so I don't think I put the slide, I think I may have put the slide on again. We saw last time that as we learn, we start to express through the archetypes, which come from the collective unconscious. And I kind of, this is just me trying to, put this together, and I kind of feel that collective sits in those morphogenic fields in a way. I don't know if dogs have archetypes or if cats have archetypes, but beyond that is the numinous unconscious. And that is the place where you feel connected, one with everything, in that sort of like God space, so to speak. So it's quite interesting. I was having a conversation with Lida, my friend in Bloemfontein yesterday. She's a Vedanza facilitator. And we were talking about her work in the hospital that she does. And we were talking how people change just, in one or two dances and everything. And then she said to me, yes, God is, dance is the way to God, And I thought, oh, that's interesting, way of putting it. Obviously God, whatever, but it's the way to the numinous, if you think about it. So when we are working with altered states and we are working with dance, we are working at these three I don't want to call them levels, but these three parameters. Sometimes we're on the individual, sometimes it's the collective, sometimes it's the numinous. And sometimes when I said earlier on, one of the prerequisites of the dance that makes a change is intention, is how does the dance take you here? You know, how does the vivences, whether we call them, or the individual dances, maybe work on the personal? Maybe it works on the conscious, because we're only now talking of one side of the dance experience, but is it working on the collective? Is it working on the numinous? And when we go there, that's when we start to connect and have the insights. Either personally, you come in a dance and you say, oh, I just realized I absolutely love, you know, chocolate cake, or, you know, I absolutely can't stand this, or I get, oh, if somebody comes near me, or all those kind of things that you start to realize in the dance. And sometimes it's collective because we're talking about archetypes, and generally on workshops, not so much in class. We're talking about working with archetypes, and we're really looking at deeper patterning and to shift that. And then sometimes with those delicious experiences where we are on another planet. And somebody was last night, I think, describing that to me, and I was going, yeah, I know that. It's that moment when the music and the dance are new, and it's just like one big blissful state, you know? And then somebody looks and then they go, oh, these people are really strange. So we use the dance to go from the ordinary to the non-ordinary. So we're using the dance to go from conscious, present, focused, whatever, way of being, to the non-ordinary, which is going to go into the altered states and the trance states, and we'll come to that. Just as an aside, I wasn't going to do this, but I think it's interesting because it just came to me, is the Biodanza class is both of these, okay? In Biodanza, there's a methodology, or the methodology stimulates your conscious awareness, your identity, your presence. That's when you're having fun, you're laughing, you're giggling, you're connecting, you're doing all the kind of things with your friends, and you think everybody's like one big happy family, and it's wonderful. You're coming into your body, which often we're not in, you know, we're in the mind, and then we go into the non-ordinary. We take you suddenly, you know, and then you float around the room, and then you can't walk, and you know, it's like, okay, we're there. And then you have funny looking eyes. That's the non-ordinary, because you've kind of gone somewhere. So those states of the non-ordinary or altered states, first of all, can be, depending on how you go into trance or an altered state, can be an integrated experience or a dissociated experience. So the shamans or the shamanic work, some of it takes the shaman out of their body. They dissociate from the body, and they're flying around with the spirits or whatever, or becoming whatever. It's a dissociation. Okay. When we are dancing, we're not trying to do that. We're trying to stay present in a different way. And so we're going into an integrative trance. In other words, we staying integrated with the body, the mind, the experience, the emotion, everything, and we're going into trance. I'll show you in another slide, but there's almost like, for me anyway, I see it as a continuum. And on the one side, we can go into what's called ecstatic trance, which is coming out of your body, but you're there, you know. So you can induce trance with like rhythm, with intensity of emotion, with force, so to speak, and you can go into a trance which is ecstatic. You've seen this stunt. Oh, yeah, yeah, and you don't even know where you are. It's like a football stadium, you know. Hello, you're in ecstatic trance. They scored a goal. Yeah, you know, mind goes. And on the other side is a regressive trance. In other words, we going inward. So ecstatic is going outward. It's a trance that's I see it as big, jagged, all over the place. The regressive is going inward. It's coming into oneself, so it's an inward journey. So we're going from, so what we're doing in the dance is, again, I'll just repeat, we're going from a primary or normal consciousness to secondary or consciousness. I'm trying to bring a lot more words into this because you read a whole lot of different. So on the left, the primary, it's not one state in itself. When you are in ordinary consciousness, you can be super alert, you know, and that might be when you're driving through a dodgy neighborhood, you know, you're super alert. You're looking, you're sensing, you're there. That's super alertness. And on the other side, you know, on the other side of that spectrum is automation. You're driving down to Cape Town and you get to Colesberg and you don't know how you got there. You know, you're somewhere else. But you're still on the conscious side. Okay, so in that side as well, there's a gradation. Okay, the dance tries to take us from automation to alert, and maybe to super alert. Okay, so we push, and that's where the creative component comes in, because if we just had some steps, you know, this was this was another dance modality that had, you know, little routines and steps that everybody had to follow, then we can slip into automation. You know, initially it'll be novel, like, oh, let me learn these steps. Once you got it, tuck, 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 tuck. It's like line dancing, for example. You know, you don't know the steps, you're alert, you get it, then you close your eyes and you just line dance, and you know, and so on and so forth. So we have to challenge, not challenge, but push those boundaries. So the dancers needs to be constantly creating opportunities for creativity. In other words, and it has to be creativity in the moment, in the body. So it just evolves. When, this is an aside, when you dance steps that are set, like a routine, it also has an advantage. What it does is it allows the brain to develop focused thinking. Convergent thinking. That's when there's like one answer to a problem, you know. So focus and get 1 and 1 is 2. When you are going into creative dance, it stimulates or develops divergent thinking. So the more you can create these different neural pathways that I just showed you an example here in the brain and open up the possibilities, that creativity, the more you're able to think outside of the box, so to speak, when you approach a problem to which there might be 101 answers or possibilities. Anyway, so we go through the dance and we go to the secondary, and here, as I said earlier on, there's for me that gradation again of from the one side the ecstatic, out big, I don't know how else to describe it, but you know, ecstasy. Ecstasy means to be outside of the boundaries. So you're outside of yourself, you're big, you whatever. In Greek, by the way, in case you realize. And then the regressive, and it's integrative along here. Now, when we are dancing, I put the slide in here with a feedback loop because I think it's really important to note that one doesn't come along, do a dance, go from primary to secondary, and then you're there, and that's the process. You will notice that in the dance, there are moments when you come back. You know, you are aware, and there's almost like a feedback loop. So I go and I drift off, and then like I might get an insight, or I might imagine something, or I might have a thought or something. And it's almost like the mind or we come back to the other side for a moment to integrate that and maybe then go back. And so the dance becomes an integrated process, a feedback loop. It's not like an either or situation. And I think it's important to say that because sometimes we think we're not doing anything in the dance because now I'm thinking, you know, often you'll be in a situation where everybody else is zoned out, you know, in the dance, and then you are kind of like feeling your nose is itchy or something, and you think, oh, you know, I'm terrible. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do this. Just be kind to yourself. Maybe it's part of the feedback loop, and maybe you're a little bit too much on the primary, but maybe it is going around and around. So the process is the circular. So it's not linear. Just go from here to here to here, and it's over. It's a backwards and a forward. And that feedback loop allows the learning, because you need your mind to process insight. You need your mind to integrate certain things that you feel. And if you're doing it in this way, then the dance becomes a learning process or a healing process, because you are healing through those insights, or you're developing through those insights, or whatever it is that's happening. Okay, so we don't want to talk, but you know, we do want to. So the altered state of consciousness in which we're going into the dance is a different framework. It's a different paradigm. Okay, we are going somewhere else, literally. And the rules of the ordinary do not apply. So you'll know this from your own experience, that maybe things start to become timeless. I think I've had a really amazingly successful acquisition when people say, why was it so short? You know, and I know it's been an hour and a half, because they've lost all sense of time. And sometimes it happens in class as well. And you're like, oh, that felt so quick. And then the opposite, you know, when it's torture. So long. Did I swear? I'll have to delete that for YouTube. But so there's a timelessness. In other words, we come out of the linear time, which in the Greek is called chronos. Chronos is the old man that's walking from, you know, baby to old man. It's the linear sense of time to kairos. Kairos is the English say it, but kairos in Greek, which is an all-encompassing sense of time. So I'm in that dance, I'm in that beautiful experience, and I'm just there. I'm in a space of just being. You know, I'm just being there. That's the experience of the dance. Not doing. And the same with space. You know, sometimes it is about, like, you know, where am I? Who's next to me? What's going on? So we're in a totally different framework, you know, when it comes to the altered state of consciousness. And coming back to what I said earlier on, with the Vedanta class, or basically the way it's structured, is that we work with this conscious side above the line and the subconscious below the line. And today's talk is about the below the line experience. Okay, it's not about the one. Physiologically, this is important, is we are stimulating the sympathetic nervous system when we are in the conscious part of the class. Okay, we are activating the vitality of the person. When we are going into the subconscious part of the class, or the altered states, then we are stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system. I'm too nervous to say anything more because Pascal's to say like, oh, you know, like what you're saying. But she can explain more better what these mean. But basically that is the, you know, going, what we're trying to do is to balance here. And going below the line, as I said before, we have the ecstatic, the integrative, and the regressive. And I see this as almost like going deeper into trance. I think the ecstatic is trance, but it's close to the conscious. You know, it's at that edge. And then we go into a deeper trance, and then we go into a regressive trance, and we're going deeper and deeper into the subconscious. Going inside there and mining what's there. So in the ecstatic, one of the key characteristics is euphoria, feeling great, feeling happy, principally because you've got like a whole lot of neurotransmitters pumping through your brain at that moment that's making you feel very happy. And out of the euphoria comes a sense of self. You really start to work with, who am I? You know, what am I? What am I doing? You know, I'm fantastic, generally. So self-esteem, that's the place where the healing of self-esteem comes from, and self-confidence. It's this ecstatic state. The integrative I see as that moment of left-right integration, the left brain and the right brain, which brings insight and learning. So what happens, and we'll see, I think a little bit later, is that there's a connection between the two hemispheres. So we can access the patterns and the patterns that we are not conscious of from the right hemisphere. So we suddenly go like, oh, yes, I see, I always do X, Y, Z. Because suddenly the pattern that's sitting in your right hemisphere, which is where the patterns sit, comes into the left, and you can bring it into a different consciousness. We can talk about it. I always do this, I always do that. The regressive is the proto-vivencia, the reparentalization process in Johannesburg, which I'll come back to. So there's a concept called a peak experience, where you are totally present in the here and now. So it's almost like in a timeless zone. I'm here, there's nothing else. And your whole being is present. So it's not just your head. So it's your body, your mind, your emotions, your soul, and I just put everything. Everything is present. It's a peak experience. So just hold that thought, I'm going to come back to it. So when we experience something in learning, as I said earlier on, you know, when you were learning how to do your hand, and all of our experiences are integrated. They're not compartmentalized, even though we're not conscious of them. They do involve the mind and the rational, but they also involve the emotion and the irrational, but even if we're not aware of it. And the body and the instincts, everything is integrated. And these three actually are sometimes sort of spoken about as the don't know how to pronounce it, triune, which is a model of the brain, the reptilian brain, the limbic system, and the cortex, the neocortex. So consciousness, emotion, and instinct. So an event happens, as I said earlier, and you have an implicit, explicit learning. This is just recapping. And it has an emotional component, and it has a procedural component. Emotional is, I know how to do it. Procedural, I know how to do it. I know how to put my fingers together. The emotional component is, when I do this, I may feel reverent. because that's the emotion I associate with it. I may feel comfortable, I may feel uncomfortable, whatever. There's an emotional component to it. So what happens is that in the learning and in the experience that we have out there, an event takes place of learning, or an experience. Dog bites me, or lover leaves me, or whatever it is. And because of the integrated experience, if it is a moment that means something to you, like if a dog bites you, it's going to mean something to you. If a dog comes and licks your hand, you might not give it another thought, If your lover leaves you, it might mean something to you. If your lover puts their hand on your shoulder and says, hello, my poopsie, or whatever, you're used to that. But the things that mean to you become structuring moments. And by structuring moments is it lays down a memory and a pattern of being with the emotion. And what we're trying to do with the dance is we're trying to create or create something similar, which we call vivencia, and we're trying to create another peak experience in which a relearning can happen. So I just remind you here the consciousness and eros, and I want to use this as an example because what I want to say is if I take eros that I showed in the previous slide, and I take eros as a continuum, a line of aversion and attraction. And by the way, eros in this context is not equal to love. Okay, love is an action. Okay, this is like attraction, aversion. It's an energy. When we look at this linear thing, we in a world of duality. We either attraction or we aversion or somewhere in between. There's a duality. There's a separation. If you take that line, and I'm trying to draw it and we pull it down and join the two dots and create this circle, we go into a state of non-duality, undifferentiatedness. So there is no aversion, attraction. They're both there. And it then becomes eros. So when we're going into an altered state of consciousness, when we are going into a trance, we are leaving the realm of duality and separation, and we're going into the realm of non-duality and connectedness. And then everything, it's still there. All the little dots are still there, but they are in one. It's a one experience. I feel at one with everything. I felt as if I was everything. Those are the altered states of consciousness. And just to illustrate it to you is that this state of non-duality can include love. So duality is love or hate. I either love you or I hate you. And how do we go around in the world is like that. Oh, that person, can't stand it. Oh, that person, I love them. We go into the duality, separation. But to go into non-duality, I've put an example here of a little child. A little child who does not know or process or any of this, absolutely loves the mother. I love you, mommy. Okay, mommy, I love you. And then when mommy says you can't have cake, what do they go? I hate you. And now if we did that as adults, they'd lock us up, you're schizophrenic or whatever, you don't know what you love, you hate, whatever. But in the child, in the infant, in the baby, it's a state of non-duality. They can hold love and hate simultaneously because it's in the moment. It's what's happening in the moment. And I've called that love-hating. So I pronounced it love-hating. Love-hating. Love-hating is doing, and is being. When I'm love-hating, I'm just being who I am. When I love or I hate, I'm doing it. I'm doing love or I'm doing hate. It's quite interesting to think about it because it's about going away from the ordinary, the separation, the dualistic frame of mind to something that is non-dualistic, the altered state of consciousness. And that's when we can start to explore and come back with the wisdom, because we've left that realm of like I either hate or don't hate. And now I'm in Eros. I mean, we work with Eros a lot together. Now I'm in Eros. So what does it mean? So I'm in a class and, I'm dancing with somebody intensely. We're in Eros. And then, unfortunately, some people misinterpret that, but, we deal with that sensitively. We write letters to their parents and all that good stuff. But that's why you come into Vedanta, and this is why Vedanta is a challenge for a lot of people, because it really pushes the boundaries of reality. It's as we know, of ordinary reality. It's really pushing into something that is very, very different. But what's important here to note when we go into this state of altered consciousness or trance is that it's not the experience we're changing. So it's not like, your therapist says to you, so, what would it look like if you were the mother now? Or what would it look like if, changing the experience or the perspective? It's not that. This is the amazing thing about what we do. What we do is we transform the person. We actually take the person and change them, and then the experience will be different. So we're not in the dance trying to deal with the story. We're not trying to deal with the narrative. Like, oh, shame. You poor thing. I see. Let's look at this. And then for the next 20 years, maybe you talk about it. No. Let's move you from here, where you have this dualistic narrative, and let's move you into the non-dualistic space. And in that space, we're going to open up possibilities. And if you are open up to that, then you're going to open up to these possibilities, and you can start to heal or change or whatever it is. So I'm coming back to the proto-vivencia experience as an example here, where I think in the first and maybe the second talk, I spoke to you about like maybe, around birth and in the first 7 years, we lay down a lot of the pattern of what comes later. I've read this now about 3 times about the Jesuit priests. They say, give me a child until the age of 7 and I have the man, or I'll make the man or something. They can form the child at that point. So we have the experiences, like if this was an experience. And we form the pattern, and we form the habit, we know that. But sometimes the emotional component is destructive. It's not constructive. Okay, so we might be protective, or we might do things in a very strange way. So, for example, let's use the dog. That's always my favorite. Dog bites the child at 3. Now, every time the child sees a dog, it tenses and stresses. Doesn't even then, the man or the woman will tense and stress. They don't even know why. Sometimes they do. Because somewhere there was the pattern that was laid out. So what we do in the regressive trance is to take the person back into a state of being that is like the state of being an infant. So the altered state of consciousness is a state of being where we are undifferentiated, where we are learning through movement, where we are experiencing in a different way, and presenting an opportunity for alternatives. Okay, so it's not just, this isn't linear. You have to understand this. This isn't like we're going to do a yang dance and then you're going to be cured of your fear of dance. It doesn't work. Sometimes it does, as I said, it does work like that in a minor talk, but it's very specific. But in an ordinary dance, it doesn't work like that. We are shifting consciousness. So the what happens now physiologically when we to go into these states, for example, either the regression or the ecstasy or whatever, is that as we stimulate, for example, a trance through rhythm, dum, 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 or a trance through some kind of regressive dance. We've all done this, where you kind of like do the face and then you just like keep going until you're gone. What happens in the brain is that the three centers of the brain, in the three-part brain, your neocortex, your thinking, rational planning side, your emotional side, and your instinctive side, start to synchronize. And they synchronize through brain patterns. There's a guy called Michael Winkelmann who's written a lot about this. And it takes the brain wave down. So it takes it from like alpha, it takes it down to, theta, that is like a meditative state or somewhere. So it takes the whole brain, synchronizes the patterns. So what happens is all three brain centers are synchronized. And in that moment, you are, because of that, in the state very similar to a child, a baby, because your instinct, what's natural for you to do, your emotion and your control center, so to speak, are synchronized downwards, basically. So it kind of shuts down a little bit, the control center. You're conscious, but you're going into a state similar to the infant in your brain. Another I mentioned earlier, another integration is the left-right integration. The pathways between the left and the right are reinforced through the trance. Another one is the neurotransmitters. So when we are going into trance, for example, there'll be a release of endorphins. So there'll be a release of dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin. So we'll start to feel less pain, more pleasure, connectedness, euphoria. That's the ecstatic state. Which is why sometimes, it's when you are doing some dance and doing some regressive dance and it's finished, you can't wait to get home to have a bar of chocolate or something, because there's something that's been awakened with you instinctively at that kind of level. So, and then coming just back, this is just a reminder from the last slide to say that when we are working with these proto-vivencias, we're not working with the stories. We are working more with the archetypes and working with the expression of in Vedanta, these 5 lines on the side: vitality, sexuality, creativity, affectivity, and transcendence. So we're really working in the non-dual, past the story, opening up the possibility, but taking people into an altered state of consciousness, which is physiological. It's a physiological state, but it's more than that, is what I want to say. It's actually more. It's a whole experiential state.